I'm your host, DrekkSama, and I want to welcome you to Where Does RTS Art Comes from uh, an Immortal Gates of Pyre artist panel powered by the awesome people at Sunspear Games. Before we start, I want all of you in the audience right now to think of a piece of art that gives you a positive memory. It doesn't have to be RTS, but if it does, that'd be really good too. All right. This is mine. This piece of art here is mine. What you're going to be seeing on the screen is the loading screen for StarCraft Brood War. For me, this screen meant my parents are finally off the phone so that I could use my dial up internet. It meant that I could finally find out what happened to Kerrigan. And it meant I can finally chat with my friends and clanmates. Now, I want you to think of a piece of art that has a negative emotion. And this is mine. This is the lost screen for Warcraft 3. This meant frustration on not healing my hero, the Death Knight, fast enough. And it meant anxiousness to review my replay. But it also meant sadness for letting down my clanmates in our clan war. Let us know in the chat, positive or negative, a piece of art that has similar feelings for you. Because we are currently in a new timeline for RTS. New titles are coming out. And they're all vying to be the next great RTS. But something I want you to we don't consider is a part of that battle is how game art and the style makes us feel. I want to quote someone from my chat in the pre-show that I had yesterday, and they said it's freaking hard to make art for an esport. You have to balance spectacle with clarity and emotional resonance. And I totally agree. And that's what we're going to explore in this panel today, where we have 3 artists of Sunspear Games, and they will help guide us through how we get from ideas to win screens. So I want you all to welcome our guests. All our guests here. Oh, I saw. All right. So I want you to all put up your hands as I introduce, so everyone here in the audience can know who we're seeing. All right. Starting with Javier. Javier, former StarCraft 2 Grand Master, currently art director. He has 280 row spreadsheet. I'm not even joking. 280 row spreadsheet of every game he's ever played. He's a lover of Steingate, Uzumaki by Junto Ito, and My Hero Academia, among others. Then we have Annabelle.
That's me.
Annabelle, concept artist, love of history, a lover of Sailor Moon, Glass Mask,
Oh yeah.
manga, and she owns the art book of Prince of Egypt, which is one of my personal favorites.
Yeah.
And played Diablo 2 as a kid, mainly Sorkin Assassin. And then we have Melody. Yeah, Melody, concept artist, unit design, usually UI elements, smaller, lower tier units. And she was inspired to be an artist from Metroid Prime because of its unlockable concept art. I hope a lot of you in this audience can remember Metroid Prime. I don't know how old everybody is, but she loved Studio Ghibli before it was cool, starting with Princess Mononoke, and a fan of Dungeon Meshi, or Delicious Dungeon in English, the manga. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to this panel. I want to start off with a very simple, easy, run-of-the-mill question for us all to go around before we get into it. I want you to tell us where you're located, and then what was the last song you rocked out to? I want to define rocked out. Rocked out, I mean like no one's watching and you're bobbing your head in and out. So let's start with Javier. Where are you located right now, and what was the last song you rocked out to?
Hey, so I'm located in Mexico City. Ooh, and the last song I rocked out to, that's a really hard one. I think
We only
it
ask
might
hard
have
ones
been.
here.
Oh, it's so hard. I think it might have been "Oh Lord" by Foxy Shazam.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right. Maybe. All right, Melody, what about yourself?
Come back to me. I gotta check my Spotify recents.
Annabelle, save us. Tell us, where are you
Yeah.
located currently, and what was the last song you rocked out to?
I'm in Oregon. The last song, I'm actually looking at my YouTube history. It was Karma Coma by Massive Attack. They're an excellent
Ooh.
band. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
They're the guys who did the house theme song, just in case you don't know who they are.
Melody, are you can you tell us? Has
Yes,
Spotify
okay.
revealed?
I had time to pull up my Spotify. Um, I would say the most recent one I've listened to is Choke by I Don't Know How But They Found Me, which is it's just a hell of a band name.
I I love it. So, but where are you located? Let us know too. Where are you located currently? Forgot that part.
I am also in Oregon.
Perfect. Cool, cool, cool. All right, everybody. Now that we've got that out of the way, we're all in it. Let's talk a bit about art in Immortals. And so a lot of times people, you heard obviously in my introduction about the emotion that a lot of people feel and get from artwork and and designing, how the design in the RTSs makes them feel. But what, you know, what influences from RTSs do you guys draw from when working on Immortal Gates of Pyre? Anyone could jump in, by the way. I'll let you guys sort of.
Ooh,
We'll start with RTS. So let's
specifically,
talk
Yeah.
about
Javier, you might want to
specifically
go because
RTS.
I haven't played too
yeah,
many of them.
specifically from
Ah.
RTS. So there's obviously there's always some StarCraft, right? Like you cannot
Mhm,
not be influenced by StarCraft if you're working
mhm.
on RTS. But there's some Spellforce for anyone who hasn't played Spellforce. It's an amazing like mix between RTS and RPG, and the art is just gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. Um,
Are we talking like the concept art? Are we talking unit design? Kind of, because art is very
mhm,
nebulous. So let's kind
yeah.
of, bring it down. What part of the art?
So something I love about Spellforce art is just the tone and vibe it has. It's a
Hmm.
very refined, very powerful, very evocative setting, and I really dig it. I do know we've drawn some influence here and there from StarCraft. Something that's just done better than probably any other RTS up until this point is how well it works in relation to the gameplay and the player experience. Right?
Mm.
I also find it very beautiful, but the art just works. It's insanely readable. It's built um, to really work with the gameplay and enhance the gameplay in a way that few other RTSs have done.
Can you maybe tell us what an element like that would be? Because you say enhance the
Mhm.
gameplay. What
Yeah.
does enhance the gameplay? Uh, like, can you quantify enhancing the gameplay? Because, like, I know as a player, that's how I would
Mhm.
describe enhancing the gameplay. I feel it. I just feel it. But do
Mhm.
you, as an artist, are you able to maybe extract anything like that? Like, what
Yeah,
does
there's
that?
there's few ideas I can throw out there, and Melody and Annabelle, feel free to jump in if you think of any yourselves. But
Yeah.
for example, the silhouette of every single asset in StarCraft is very unique and easy to distinguish from all of the other ones, right? There's a couple
Oh,
of exceptions, but it's easy to, at a glance, know what's going on, right? Um, the way the way player color is handled, it's also another very important part of art enhancing gameplay. You need to be able to tell who owns what, especially like in a heated, chaotic battle. Um, the way attention is brought to the important elements, right? So if there's a very dangerous spell, you want to be able to know intuitively um, that's something you need to be careful about. You need to get the hell um,
i-
away from
is
there.
is that do you use colors? Is like how do you? What is the method to distinguish a dangerous element? Is it colors? Is it depth? Like, what are the techniques that you use to help let the player know at a glance, and to be aware cognitively that something
Mhm.
is something they should be drawing their attention.
I can weigh in on that because that's something that we
Yeah.
deal a lot with in our concepts. The short answer is there's a lot of different options. Primarily, the best way that we find to make dangerous parts of units stick out is to make them bigger.
Ooh.
When you're working with weapons on a medieval or fantasy style RTS, you need to be sure that the weapons are sometimes the proportions can be a little goofy, but you need to make sure that they're visible from a distance, and that means swords need to be bigger, bows need to be enormous. If the character has a shield, it needs to be a huge tower shield. You can't hold back on that kind of stuff because that's the sort of thing that quickly defines the character's role in the game and makes them visible at a glance.
Is that something that is that like a human element that humans identify big with dangerous? Like, like why bigger? Like, is it just visually so that we can see it amongst many things? Like, what does bigger really kind of signify for a player?
Bigger signifies importance. It signifies that this is what you should look at. And if you make it more visible, then it's more likely that they're going to look at it to begin with. In terms of effect design, which is something that I've worked a lot on, that's also true. Things that are bigger and flashier are higher priority in your stack. So a great example of that is our spell Pillar from Heaven, which it used to be sort of the equivalent of the nuke from StarCraft 1 or StarCraft 2.
Right.
We've since turned it into sort of an all-range buff that has huge effect on the battlefield, but not quite as much destructive force. But that flashiness has stayed with the spell because it's still just as important.
Is that someone agreed with us now back there?
Yeah, he's
does that mean you mentioned StarCraft 1? Does that mean that you had the opportunity to sort of see the effects of how it was in an RTS like StarCraft 1 and then extrapolate on that for that spell?
I believe Melody is frozen.
Oh, okay. Well, well, there we go. So, in terms of like Annabelle, what about yourself in terms of any experience with spell designs and even making for the player to be aware?
Well, I haven't designed. Well, no, I've done like designing like animations and like special effects for particular units, but
Yes. Well, even for let's say for even animations wise
yeah.
and special effects.
Well, one thing I want to say really quick before I dive into that is about the size thing. It was like, have you ever
Yeah,
played any of the Resident Evil games?
I have yes, all.
Okay.
Yes.
So like in the later games, whenever you're fighting a boss, they'll usually have some giant glowing thing on their body, like, oh, like shoot here. That's kind of what it's like in RTS too. Well, like in some respects, it's like
Yeah.
you gotta like draw importance to the thing. Like this thing will kill you. Like it's look at how brightly colored it is and like dangerous. But also too like on like some wild animals they have like really bright colors to show like, oh, they're venomous. I better not eat that. That's kind of like, at least for some units at least in the Aru faction, that's kind of it pertains to that. It's like, oh, that thing is like brightly colored. It's probably gonna have some horrible acid attack that can melt me into a pile of bones.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting parts about working on Aru is that they follow a lot of different structural rules to like how color works.
Yeah.
Because they're creatures that are made of plant matter instead of flesh and bone. We couldn't, in a lot of cases, draw on our usual suspects for how color is distributed. So, great example of this is the Masked Hunter, which is he's an Aru, right? So he's made entirely of plant material, which means the distribution of player color specifically had to be determined basically by just feeling it out and by looking at plants instead of animals for reference. So we couldn't use other RTS factions for this because there are no RTS factions that exist that are made up entirely of plant-based characters.
So where do you turn? Like, do you turn to the real life for that? Like, where do you turn for that solution?
Real life is always my first reference. Whenever we start a concept, we always start with a mood board of real life locations, references, and creatures. In the case of Aru, that means collecting botanical pictures. That means gathering close up textures of different types of wood, taking pictures of overgrown roots, stuff like that. All of that stuff is hugely helpful, not only in building a library of records that we can use for our art, but also in understanding how the character we're building is going to be shaped in silhouette.
Oh. And for others who've been on, like, who've worked on the Aru, uh, was there any particular plant or animal or anything that jumped out to you that really would signify, if you were to summarize the Aru, what would you use in terms of like a real world example or element that you drew from?
Okay, I have a bone to pick about this actually, because yesterday there was a guy named Pig streaming, and he showed off
Yes.
the ichor for like a split second, and this other guy named Santa said that, oh, it's a murder vomit cat. And I was so upset. I was like, no, I was screaming at my computer. I was like, no, it's a murder vomit dog, damn it. Because, and I'll show you, I have a lot of reference pictures of boxer dogs because they're kind of what I was going for, you know? They got like the big jowls and they drool everywhere, but they're also kind of like skinny and like sinewy and weird looking. So I was so outraged. I ran and I typed in the chat. I was like, "Oh God, I failed. I have to start this design over." But that's one thing that I was so mad about because I was like, you know, I poured my life into this vomiting dog thing, and you got the species wrong.
I think since it's still a placeholder and we can see
Yes, it's still like
the texture
sliding
properly, like
around.
right now it looks like a little plastic figurine, right? Like a little
Yeah.
toy soldier moving across the battlefield with no animation, all stiff like
Yeah.
that. I think once there's animations in place and the textures are in,
I hope so. I hope
I'm
it
pretty
gets fixed.
confident it's going to show the dog influences much more
I hope
clearly.
so because I was so like, oh man. As an artist, you know, it like gets you like right here. It's like no.
That's an interesting question though to bring up, is like, is there a part of being like in this profession, the element where you put your love in it, because like all you guys are drawing from real world examples to bring together, you know, and your experiences to bring together this art. And when the player gets their hand on it and it's not maybe the
Yeah.
reaction you wanted,
And then you're
how
like,
do
you hear what they
you
call it, and you're like, oh, there's another nickname for it we didn't think of. Like, what was yesterday? I forget what they were calling it, but they kept referring to it as like a maple syrup pig thing or something like that. And I was like, I never associated like the sacks of acid all over and the amber stuff as maple syrup, but hey, to each their own, I guess.
do you
And it
guys try to
also
go
didn't
for
look like a pig.
associations? Do you guys try
That
to go for like in like purposely, aside from what the player takes from, do you guys try to bring mental associations to it? Like, I'll give you an example. Yesterday when we were doing the stream, I think a lot of people, we saw the quaff and we called them like the heavenly Protoss, and then we saw the R and we're like, oh, we called them tree zergs because it helped us wrap our minds around what we were seeing. And do you guys ever
Right.
go for associations deliberately
Oh
for
yeah.
the audience to be able to get things easier? Oh,
Oh,
I
I
think
think you're muted, Melody.
you're muted, Melody.
I'll
You
talk
guys
in a
hear
few
me?
times.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Associations are one of our key interaction points with the things that have come before. It's something that comes up a lot, especially early in design, because StarCraft set up some really easily understandable archetypes, not only in gameplay but also in design space and character design. We lean on that kind of thing a lot. We want to set our own boundaries and we want to explore our own spaces, but it's important to understand that like those are tropes that exist for a reason, right? They're easily digestible. They make it a lot more understandable for players to get in, because their understanding of the Protoss, for example, in StarCraft 1 will shape their experiences with the Karath, because we want them to play the Karath similarly to how they used to play the Protoss, right?
Absolutely. Like that was my mentality, and even when we were talking to our audience, that was what I was hoping we could introduce, is the idea that this is, if you know the Protoss, this feels like a Protoss. If you know the Zerg, this kind of feels like a Zerg. And so to the point, and I want to pull this out to the floor. How do you? What methods do you do to strike the fine line between keeping close to what players know, but also forging your own visual identity?
I'd say one of the biggest things is having your own references and influences outside of, for example, in this case, Protoss and Zerg, right? Which, interestingly enough, by the way, just like a small funny thing, Aru plays much more like Terran. Gameplay-wise, they're much closer to Terran. Although visually,
Really? Okay.
I clearly understand the comparison with Zerg. They're like creepy and eerie. But anyway, going back to your question, having your own references and your own voice and your own reason to your own goals for creating something, right? So having clear gameplay ideas, what you want to communicate with visuals about gameplay, having cultural influences. For example, with Korad, some of our cultural, like real world cultural influences are the Persian empires, for example, Babylon or the Achaemenid Empire, the Byzantine Empire. So that already gives some ideas that might take you away from known IPs, right? For Aru, some of our cultural influences are pre-Hispanic Mesoamerican cultures like the Mayan or the Aztec, a little bit of Celtic influences. And then the lore we have, like Creative has written like a couple encyclopedias worth of lore and have very solid world building. So that already gives you a lot of different like foundations to build on that will take you to very unique and distinct places.
Does anyone else have anything else to kind of bring in? Because I'm wondering, do you anchor yourself somewhere and then sort of build off of it, or do you start from your unique place and draw inspiration from the familiar to kind of shape it? Is there a process towards that?
I'm mildly lucky and also kind of cursed in that I didn't really play a lot of StarCraft growing up. I played a bit, so like I know like I kind of remember some of the units like Zerg and Vulture and Marine and all that stuff. But for the most part, I just kind of go off of like when I was designing like the Icor and the Red Seer and stuff for Aru, I just went like totally wild with like the Mayan stuff because I love the Mayan culture so much. So I was like pulling all these like pictures and like trying to look up stuff. I actually have this book my grandfather kind of co-wrote, and it's like called The Art of the Maya Scribe. And there's pictures in there of like illustrations from like like drinking vessels and whatnot and like clay pots and stuff. But it's like stuff I've never seen anywhere else or anything, and I really want to actually put some of those designs into units someday. But
you need to
it's
share
like,
some of those.
Yeah. There's like one guy that's like there's like an illustration of like a warrior, and he's got like a whole like dead vulture on his back, and it's so cool looking. I'll send it.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's like it's kind of stuff that people have either never seen before or they kind of like know a little bit about the Mayan. But if you pull something like that to them, they'll be like, I've never seen anything like that. Like that looks cool as hell. I want to see more of that. So I feel like bringing in like history that people have either forgotten or maybe have never experienced before is like a great way to make something really stick out from all the other IPs.
I can weigh in on my end.
Yep.
I can tell you that I'm a person who is constantly trying to appreciate the underappreciated. If there is something that I feel really hasn't shown up in the lexicon of tropes, I kind of want to push it in, right? One of my favorite things about working on Immortal is that we're exploring references that haven't been brought up in just about any RTS or any genre. You don't see a lot of Byzantine art in a lot of RTS. You don't see Mayan take the front and center appeal that we're looking for. When we gather references, I am constantly trying to find the stuff that no one's seen before, push it into the front, and make stuff as weird as possible. And then everybody who manages me has to push it back and say, Melody, this is too weird. Can you calm it down a little bit? So it's a valuable lesson on how much of art is kind of a push and pull between the artist and the team who works with them to manage expectations and to create the unit as it needs to exist in the game.
Can you give us an example of a pushback in terms of, like, someone might say, is it too bold, too colorful? What is like a pushback that you might get when you try to go weird?
So the biggest issue that I've had with the Aru is we have a phrase that we use when we're designing units called the bumblebee effect. Specifically when we're talking about player color. Player color distribution is something that we manage very tightly on all of our units and structures. The reason for that is that is the key identification point for your entire army. And if you can't see it clearly on every single unit, you're going to lose your army in the mix and you're going to lose the game. One of the things that was a part of our recent restructure was actually designing those so that they would be more visible. But in a lot of the design passes that we did before and during that change, we discovered that if you break up those blocks of player color into smaller pieces, it produces a kind of disorienting and hard to identify effect, which we call the bumblebee effect. You need to be sure that player color, whether or not it's organic or created, it needs to be broken up into understandable blocks of color that are visible from all angles.
Anyone else want to kind of tack onto that? Because that, I think, is...
Like in StarCraft terms, I think this might be useful for anyone who's not too familiar with the art of Immortal. The Zealot is not too good in these terms of player color distribution. It's got like small areas of player color all over the body, and it's like slashes the body. It's less readable player color wise than a lot of other units. The Marine is really good because it's a big chunk of player color with a big gun that's not player color, and the
helmet.
That's not player
Helmet.
color, right?
Yeah.
The helmet, yeah. So that's a good example. And yeah, we start noticing when we screwed it up in our own units, we had a hard time playing it ourselves, and we've gotten a lot better as we move forward.
And so we're talking about player color distribution versus like the unit's color palette, right? And so that element, and so you guys manage that really closely. And so is there pushback on your personal take on, wanting to go weird and bigger that interferes with the other team's ideas, pushing back, saying, oh wait, this element of the game needs to be considered? And so how would you describe an interaction maybe with, maybe your desire to make the units feel more unique versus the players' expectations having to be put into consideration?
I think the best example I can think of that is there's a constant clash between concept and implementation. Obviously, everybody's on the same team here. We're all trying to make the best game and the coolest game that we can. But I think implementation is constantly dealing with the realities of the engine that we're working with. They're constantly dealing with what Unreal 5 can... Is it Unreal 5? It's Unreal 5, right?
Yeah.
I can remember. I can remember the engine. I can never remember the number. The realities of the engine that we're working with are something that we need to manage, and that means that sometimes the concepts that we make are a little too ambitious for the engine to handle. Great example of this is the Bone Stalker. I don't know if the Bone Stalker, it should have been shared recently. It's in the game now.
Yeah.
The Bone Stalker's cloak was a point of contention because flowing cloth, especially flowing cloth that touches the ground, becomes an absolute nightmare for tech to implement. It's one of those things that I learned early on in my process is that the decisions that a concept artist makes are kind of like the butterfly effect. They can ripple out throughout the entire pipeline process. And if you decide to make a character with a big, huge, long cloak that brushes against the ground for like a tier 1 unit, implementation is going to have a hard time implementing it. Animation is going to have a hard time making it not break when you create the units. All of that stuff is stuff that creates problems, and it means that there's a lot of pressure on the concept artist to produce stuff that is actually workable.
And this is a perfect element because I wanted to mention I had a question about constraints, and this is almost perfectly leading into the idea of constraints. And so the engine is one constraint. I presume even time is a constraint, and then the player's resources, graphic, like I'm sure implementation like looks at the player's resources. Do you find that you run up a lot of constraints mainly in your concept, or when you've already pushed it through and you have to go and revise it? Where do the restraints fall into the pipeline of you putting out something?
So usually we try to anticipate to everything as early as possible because it's where it's easiest and cheapest to tweak things and adjust things. And it's hard. It's really hard. Like concept art, really hard. I don't envy Melody and Annabelle here because they need to like shoulder the weight of the whole pipeline while they're trying to make something cool and exciting and fun. And that's not easy. That's like a really hard juggling act. So we try to catch everything as early as possible. And as I said now like a couple of times, it's really hard. You don't want to, on one hand, you don't want to like assume something will be hard if you don't really know, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, this seems hard. And once you check with like the tech artist or the animator, they're like, oh no, that's easy, no problem. And sometimes you assume something could be easy and go smoothly, and they're like, oh god, like this is gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah,
no.
guilty. That was me. Sorry.
Because that's what I'm thinking, is because you as artists, I'm sure you want to be creative and bold and you want to put your mark, and then there's elements that you don't want to artificially constrain your talent before, or your concepts, your ideas before they get there. So I was curious, and I'm maybe some of our audiences might be curious where that fell in line. So now I want to kind of take an element of a page from esports, and I know, Javier, you're gonna probably have a ton of elements here, but I'm positive concept even will be able to bring points, and even UI, especially UI design. How does the element of esports filter in to your work? Like obviously players are gonna play it,
yeah.
and there's obviously you're gonna think about campaign and co-op, but like the element that players are gonna play this competitively on a big stage, even spectator friendly. These elements,
Right.
how does this filter into your work?
That's a hard one. That's a hard one. So UX UI, I'm absolutely not an expert. Our UX team are very thorough in how they approach this. But generally speaking about esports, I would say you cannot build something and make it an esport. It's something that happens if the factors are right and the ecosystem is right, and like you can make your product put your product in the right place for it to become an esport. But I think we have seen with many examples of games that have launched, you can't really decide it's going to be an esport and have that happen. And you also need to design so designing for something to be an esport targets things for the most hardcore demographic you have, right? People that are involved in esports, that's as hardcore as it gets. Then there's also the expectation side of things. You need to make things viewable, easy to understand, and exciting for an audience that's just watching and not playing. And then you also need to be able to cater to the more casual audience. That's going to be like a big, huge chunk of your audience. That's probably going to keep your ecosystem healthy and thriving and alive, right? So for esports, there's a lot of things that, as I said, I wouldn't be the expert about UX and UI that need to be super tight. You need to design with spectators in mind. So, for example, Immortal, we have the observer capabilities, and we have like a we have some special camera options. If you want to do some cool, more cinematic stuff, that's
But
exciting for
even
an
if we're
audience.
going, even like, yeah, because UX UI will be its own thing. And Melody, you did some UI elements. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. So there's a limit to what concept artists really have their fingers in. I try to make as much as possible to draw from the references, the successful references that I know of. Great example of this, when we were working on, there's been a lot of work done on ability icons recently. When I worked on those, it was incredibly key that we reached to as many games as possible to see how many companies did it a certain way, compare things, see if there was a new space that we could explore. We're currently in the process of understanding, restructuring, and redesigning a lot of our ability icons so that they're more recognizable, more striking, more colorful. And a lot of that involves deciding, how are we coloring things, right? There's a lot of distinctive MOBA styles out there, and obviously Immortal has its own art style. But in terms of structuring color, structuring light, how the action of each of these icons is directed, those are things that we can learn from successful games in the field, right?
And when we're thinking of colors, and is there any game that comes to your mind that really strikes out as one that does the colors? You're smiling, so like, is there a game?
So I can list off a few of the references that I've worked on literally
Please.
within the past week. I have been pulling icon references from Final Fantasy XIV, Dota 2, League of Legends, StarCraft 2, Guild Wars 2. There's a lot of twos. For the most part, we're looking for things that fit into the MOBA and RTS genre. But I think one of the things that we've learned is that the real pioneers of icon design in a lot of spaces is MMOs. Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, Guild Wars 2, all of those tend to have very specific art styles because that's something that sells their world. And finding out how they explored that art style through icons is a great teaching tool for us when we create our own art style.
That's actually really. I want to pause for a second. I want to say that's actually really exciting to hear, the element to tell your world through your icons, because it's such an innocuous thing for people to think about. I personally take icons for granted. I I don't even think about it. But the idea that the icons actually sell the world, can you maybe highlight an, a specific element, like maybe light, darks, colors, like what elements of icons sell the story of the world to a player?
So in terms of, obviously there's a little bit of a limit to what icons can actually do for your story, right? Like you can't, we would all love to just be able to put out a picture of an ability and say, this is our lore. But the thing that you need, that's important to understand is design language that we establish in icons or in other places of the world can echo through other places of the game experience. Great example of this, the Eye of Aros is a design tool that we use a lot when we're designing Karatha units and structures. It's sort of a motif that repeats a lot. You can see it on the Magi, you can see it on the Reliquary. It's a recognizable icon for Karath and their devotion to their main creator, Aros. And when we reuse that, in icons, in structures, and abilities, we're teaching the player that this is what Karath is, right? These are the shapes that you need to look for that sell Karath as something that exists.
Shout out to Florin, by the way, who came up with that motif. Florin is her concept lead, and it's now all over crap.
Wow, fantastic! And I love how the elements ripple. You use the word ripple, and I'm hoping maybe we can get some of the artwork on screen so that people can see, maybe get like a reference of how vibe will kind of just reverberate throughout the rest of the game. And so, what? And I would like you all to kind of weigh in on this. In your area, what would you how would you what would you pinpoint is your messaging you're trying to get across to your player through your work?
I think it depends on what faction you're working on. Obviously, if you're working on Karath, the idea that you're pushing is this is an empire that is terrifyingly strong, built on a cosmic power, and if you look hard enough, you can see the cracks starting to form. If you're looking at the Aru, you're seeing someone who is perfectly adapted to the cruel and sometimes violent world of Nuoth. You're looking to sell to the viewer that the Aru are something to be feared, right? A lot of those are things that don't have a specific byline because they can vary from unit to unit. Great example of this: the symbiote for the Aru is probably the cutest character that we have in the game presently, and we wanted to keep that nice and simple. So we're not going to cover him in spikes. We're not going to cover him in blades. He's not going to have any weapons because he's a worker unit, right?
Anybody else? Maybe Javier.
I got nothing.
Like, is there a message you try to, even in that message, like, what is there an element of your own personal experiences that you would like to come through your work, even to the player, that the player recognizes?
That might be a little hard to like kind of differentiate. Like, oh, I recognize that unit. That's obviously Annabelle's work. No, that would be nice, but I guess one thing that I'd like to try to bring in is, I said it before, like historical stuff that people don't really remember. Like, it's cool that the factions we have so far are built upon kind of real world stuff that people either have heard about or never seen, or they know everything about it. So like, if you're designing like a Karath unit and somebody recognizes like, oh, they use like that kind of like motif from like a medieval, like depiction of, a god or something like that, it'll be cool. It's like people will be like, oh, I see what they did there. Like, that's kind of like a little secret message between me and the artist. I get it.
What about yourself, Javier? Anything?
So yeah, like I personally try to not have like my own personality bleed too much through the art. Well, I don't usually do too much art myself, but I try not to have my personality bleed through the feedback I give to artists, because I prefer the game to be like its own thing, and I think it's impossible to a certain extent, right? Like anything you do as an artist, I believe, whether you want it or not, bleeds a little bit of your personality into it, which is kind of cool in a way. But I want to communicate the story of the world that creative has built for it as well as possible. I always try to have the art of the game be surprising in one way or another. Like, do you ever experience when you see like game art or any other form of art, when you see something that you know, but it's got like an extra something that makes you go, oh, like, that's freaking interesting, that's cool, or that's cute. Like, when it surprises you as a viewer, that's something as the audience of any piece of art, I always really, really enjoy, and it's something I always try to make the art of Immortal do. Have that extra special bit of something that surprises you as a viewer. It's one of my favorite things. So yeah.
Well, anybody else? Anybody have that happen to them? Like Melody or Annabelle have like a piece of art that just kind of like surprises you? That just kind of like
Like, yeah, I do. I recently got Dragon's Dogma, and oh my god, I love that game to pieces. I've only been playing for like 4 days or something, but I love how they did like all the armor design, all the clothing design, because it's like, oh, it's like it's medieval, but it's got like their own kind of little twist on it. Like, oh, they like took, like a jerkin or a tunic or something, but they kind of made it look like something you'd see maybe in the medieval world, but it's got like a nice little like fashionable twist on it, so it's not like,
mm.
oh, it's really ugly, I don't want to put that on. But I love how everything looks. Like they really did their research on it, and then they gave it their own little spin on it, and I love that. Oh,
What about yourself,
I
Melody?
I have a specific set of games that I keep coming back to more than anything else because I think their artistic identity is just so strong. Armello is one of them. Let me check my Steam library. I had them in my hands. Oh, Hades by Supergiant. Supergiant is one of those companies that I keep in my references list at all times because, in terms of a company that has its own artistic identity, I think they're the benchmark. They are one of the companies
Mm.
where you could look at any game that Supergiant has made, and you could say, "Wow, no one else could make that but Supergiant." Right? Hades is a perfect distillation of that. Every single character in that game is absolutely tremendous. You could put them as the main character of their own games, and they would stand on their own. That's how strong their designs are. But it's supplemented by small touches that I think can teach us at Sunspear specifically how we explore our own style. Great example of this in Hades. This may not be something that a lot of people noticed, but there are a lot of sort of little colored lines on the edges of units that serve to sort of define these characters as something that is almost made of light, something like
Right.
scintillant or reflective of a bunch of different colors. When you see that in the gods of Hades, it makes you realize that you can apply small stylistic touches like that to your own work to create an artistic identity that functions in a unique way.
Is there an example that you could make from your own work that has that you tried to get that across?
Un- Unfortunately, I don't have anything presently that I could like snag from right out of the books. But I do think that the Whitewood Reaper is probably the purest distillation of me getting a chance to sort of explore what I wanted from the art. There was a brief portion at the very start of the White Reaper's creation where I actually spent some time exploring exactly what I wanted the Whitewood Reaper's hands to look like, and that is a portion of the design that endured until implementation.
Oh, good.
That the having the time to explore the very specifics of a single part of a unit is something that we don't often get a chance to, but defining the character's hands is incredibly helpful in defining who that character is. And so by having that opportunity early in the unit, I was able to sort of stick to that and sort of flesh out the smaller parts of the unit in a very interesting way.
It's funny to think of something so small like hands being so like impactful. And so i- is there a time when like a play tester or a community member or something like that noticed something about your work that you didn't think they would see? Anybody?
Hmm. I'm
oh
thinking
man,
about it. I
struggling.
instantly think about this is not an immortal example, but what you mentioned, I instantly think about the StarCraft one vulture.
Hmm.
Until very, very, very recently, I didn't realize there was like a little guy driving it,
Well,
visible. I thought it was like a cockpit with like a tinted glass or something. And after
Yeah.
years of like having seen it very frequently, I was like, wow, what the hell? This is interesting. And I'm thinking about Immortal. If there's been a case like that where someone's been like, oh,
Same
this
thing for
little
me with
cute Easter
StarCraft
egg.
1 and the missile turret. I didn't know there was a man in there. There's a little man in there
There's
inside the
a
missile
wow.
turret.
I'm googling this.
Yeah. So, for anybody, is there anything that that saw that you didn't think was um that someone would notice, and that maybe a fan or a playtester just said, "Hey, this is this."
So one of the unique things about working on RTS design is that because of the expectations we're working with for units and engine, a lot of the stuff that we would consider tiny little touches ends up getting trimmed down. And
Oh,
the simple fact of the matter is, RTS units need to be very simple because you're going to have upwards of 50 on them of them on screen, and they all need to be readable. What that means is that like a lot of the time, the little touches that you would hide they're kind of hard to hide, right?
mm,
Because these are units that people are playing with for ages, right?
yeah.
So their familiarity with them. I think a great example of this is Javier. Is the missile turret with the guy in it? Is that StarCraft 1 or StarCraft 2?
One.
And I think it's also in two.
Oh, maybe
I'm
Really?
maybe
looking
two
at a
too.
screenshot
It
right
might be
now,
two.
and my mind is blown. Oh damn, yeah.
So
It might be two, but yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's
I
both
think
of them.
yeah. I think probably the pull up my I at this point I'm pulling up like my list of units that I've worked on. Um, but I think most of the time it has to do with the stuff like um, Annabelle said, where you'll release a unit and someone will say, "Oh, that looks like that," and you'll go, "Oh, shoot, I didn't think that looked like that," but they got a different take on it.
Pigman.
I've,
Gonna
I've
have a
got
word with him.
I've got I just remembered a little like cute little detail slash Easter egg that I don't remember anyone noticing. Uh, this might be a minor art spoiler. No, I don't think so. Like the thrones, karate thrones, they've got
Uh-huh.
like a face looking up, like in like exalted, looking at the
Ah.
dots. But that's actually their helmet. That's not their face. That below the face, there's a little like slit where they can. That would
Oh.
be where they would actually look through. That's a really cool detail that John Carpenter, uh, one of our artists, he concepted the throne, and
Yeah.
that blew my mind. I was like, that's so cool. It seems like the face, and once you look closely, it's like, oh no, that's part of the armor, and that's kind of eerie. I really like that detail. I find it really interesting.
Perfect. And so, kind of, pulling some of the elements together. Like, what what do you feel that you've got right in your role that you felt really proud of? Like, what elements have you felt really proud of? Um, for either like, from yourself or even that maybe a player has made you feel proud of.
I can go if nobody else has anything.
I'll say one
Go for
quick
it.
thing. I don't know if it's like the fact that I happened to design this thing, but I like that. I guess one of the tactics for Aru is spamming a lot of Icors and then like kind of Zerg rushing the enemy. And I like that. I like that it's like, oh man, the unit I designed happens to be the one that everybody spams. That's great.
Nice.
Um, in terms of my own work, I am constantly looking for improvement. It's something that obviously an artist has to do if they want to thrive in this industry. They constantly have to be looking for how they can improve, how they have improved, and I think it's really great to see a lot of the units that I worked on at the start of this process and see them as sort of testers. I've been with this company for 2 years at this point, and I think that my designs have never been stronger. Every single unit that I come up with is a way clearer distillation of the design philosophies that we've been trying to create. And I think that the best example of that, again, is either the White Reaper or the Whitewood Reaper, or the Resonant, which is just recently wrapped up. It should be going into implementation soon. But sometimes, every now and again, you just get one that is kind of a slam dunk from step one. It's not implemented yet, but my favorite design that I've ever done for this company is the Ingot, which is the Joran worker unit. Every single person who has seen the Ingot internally has said that it looks tremendous, and they're super excited for it to be in the game.
Perfect. I love it a lot. And so actually, while we're still on this topic, I want, for especially people, you in the audience and production, I want you to make sure you capture any of this. Is there an element of the game that you were able to, a detail that you thought that no one else would have noticed, but you noticed it? So I want to see if anyone has been able to suss out, more details, or not even details, but like something that just came across as one way but looked like another. Because I feel like that is something that really sticks to people's minds well
Yeah.
after the game. So we're getting close to the end, and one of the things I would like to say, and this is for anybody, is I want to put it out there too for our panelists and just even people in the audience. If we have any like future aspiring artists or game artists in the audience, is there a piece that you put out or something you put out and maybe put your effort into, but it didn't pan out? It didn't work. It didn't make it to the game, or it didn't, you thought maybe this was going to be the thing. This was something that you felt was necessary, but maybe it didn't go the way you want, maybe through feedback, or maybe just not able to entertain. Could you give us an example of an item like that?
I've got one. So I designed the Red Seer, and that was the first thing I ever designed. And this was kind of like a little while ago when the art team and the animation team didn't really talk as much as they should have, as much as we do now, rather. So I designed the Red Seer to have like these like ground roots that would kind of just like slither all over the place. And we're not talking like 5 roots. We're talking like maybe like 60 or something, like teeny annoying little details like that. And then she was also gonna have like vines for hair and stuff, and they'd be like whipping around, and they'd have like flowers on them, like a lot of stuff like that. And I think that's one of the pieces of art I submitted for this. So that was all going to be on this one unit in the game that people were going to have maybe 3 or 4 of. And then it came to pass that the animation team said that's like impossible. So we're going to have to compromise just a little bit. So we had to give her a haircut. She got that big nice flower hair now, which is, I think it actually looks way better. But we had to do that. We had to cut the roots. So now she's got like 8 or 10 roots kind of like go in and out of the ground, and like she's just kind of like slithering along. So that was one thing I was like, at the time I was like really gutted by, but looking back I'm like, that was a stupid thing I designed. I should have talked to the animation team, and now we do. So that's good. That's better.
There you go. Melody, Javier.
Wait, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I pushed to talk, but it's been acting up this morning, so I want to be sure. I think the best example I have of this, of a unit, and obviously this is my own personal opinion, of a unit that I would love to redo if I could, is the Ether Maw. I think it's a nice, strong design. It's clearly Aru. It's clearly identifiable. It's very clearly carnivorous. But I would love to add just a couple more pieces of Aru flair. I think when we're working with tier 1 units and structures, we can tend to trim back a lot of stuff, and the end result can end up being almost too sleek, right? The thing about the Ether Maw is I just want like one or two added fun little complications, maybe like a bone crown or just something that says this is not just a carnivorous plant, this is an Aru carnivorous plant.
That's interesting, because I feel the Ethermo is one of the most beloved assets in the game right now. I think everyone, yeah.
And I think that
to see what you do with it. Yeah,
it's one of those things where everybody has given us great feedback. You know, they've said that the personality of the Ether Maw is great, which is something you very rarely get to say about a unit or about a structure, right? You don't often get to say that a structure has personality. I think the personality is definitely there. It's not that I want to like build the Ether Maw again from the ground up. It's more that I just want to like give a little bit. Again, it doesn't have to be much. I just want to like paste a little Aru Greeble on there, right? Like a little bone structure that says that maybe this thing is enormous, or it's covered in like bone spurs or something. And that's a unique relationship that I have with that piece, because I'm the one who worked on it, right? Everybody else sees it and they're like, yeah, it looks great, I love him. And I feel like because I was in there, because he's my boy, I have a very specific relationship with this unit where I'm quietly in the back of the room looking for what I can do in my own designs to make it better next time.
That's fantastic. You really like, you almost like, it's like you're delivering this little baby and you're like, I want this one to from
yeah. I want all of my units to be the perfect distillation of what Immortal is. And that's not possible, but I'm still striving for it.
It's the strive for it. Javier, what about yourself?
Ooh, I think what you describe of something you pour your heart into, you work really hard and doesn't make it, it's arts. The whole art team's like bread and butter. That happens all the time, constantly. I can think of a few things I did myself. For example, at some point, the lighting on one of our old maps, of our first map, wasn't very good. So I jumped into the engine and I tweaked it myself. I worked really hard on it. I did, in my opinion, make it better. But even after I worked really hard on it, it still wasn't cutting it, you know? And you need to deal with the reality, right? Like, people weren't reacting as well to it as I hoped. And then I had to take like a really harsh look and be like, oh damn, I maybe I failed. And then Ignis, our tech artist, just jumped in there a few months later, did his thing, and it was beautiful. Like, he just made such a better work than I could ever have done. Like, you need to try and be very objective and be like, yeah, that's so much better. And that's just one of countless examples I could think of. It's one just right off the top of my head. Because it was very clear, right? I wanted my work to work, but it didn't.
That's a fantastic lesson too, in the terms of, there's a level of, you put a personality and you put your own personality, but there's also a level you're part of a team and there's a push and pull. A really good example. So I want to kind of move into the final stage and say, what's a new direction of the game's art that we will be talking about come beta or the launch of the game that you want to tell us?
Annabelle, you can go first.
I was gonna say Jorah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, we've been goofing around with that faction and doodling, and it's gonna be something.
We've been doing something unique with Jorah that we haven't had a chance to with a lot of other factions, right? Because a lot of us weren't here when design work for Aru and Kurath started. There's a new part of this process that our concept director pushed for, called we had a Blue Sky Week for Jorah. The idea of a Blue Sky Week is essentially they give a presentation on what Jorah means to them, and and then we get a week to draw literally anything from Jorah. It doesn't have to be something that's going to end up in the game. Some of us drew fashion, some of us drew architecture, some of us drew drugs. We're looking when we have a Blue Sky Week. What we're looking to do is feel out specifically what our identity of Jorah in our own minds is, and then at the end of that week, the direction team will go through. They'll take a look at everything and they'll say, your idea of Jorah as it exists now needs to change in the following ways, right? You need to change, this part of your designs really works. We're going to keep that design sensibility. This one might not fit, so we're just going to, give a gentle cross out and say maybe do this next time. What that does is at the start of every faction, there's sort of a disconnect between what the artist thinks the faction is and what creative thinks the faction is. What a Blue Sky Week does is it serves to close the gap between that week so that we don't have to spend time in the pipeline doing that. We can just have a week where we get that out of the way early. It's incredibly productive. It's incredibly valuable. It produces a lot of art for stuff that might not ever end up in the game. I spent a lot of time doing dresses and fashion for like civilian clothes. And all of that stuff is stuff that's going to end up paying off when we start working on units and structures for Jorah.
Perfect. And when we, Annabelle and then Javier, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
Or
gonna
did you
say-
just kind of agree?
Well, I was
know.
just gonna say, like, yeah, I also doodled. I drew like females workers clothing, and can I say that I drew a pilot, Javier, or is that gonna get me
Yes.
axed? Okay, yeah, I drew a
You've
pilot.
said it all.
Yeah. And then I posted some pictures of like my dad's like a big like stereo audiophile guy, so we have this like amplifier sitting in the living room, and it's got these glass tubes with like little filaments in them, and when you turn on the amplifier they like light up and they get really hot. So I posted pictures of that, and the writers were like, "Oh my god, this is like perfect, this is exactly what we need." And I was like, yeah.
I saved that picture in my reference folder specifically because I think it's going to be a fantastic reference for like everything Jorah.
And my dad
Nice.
said he'll recommend brands of what are they called, like amplifier tubes for us to look at.
It's so exciting to work on Jorah because we've worked on Aru and Karath for so long. We have design sensibilities that are very keyed into those two factions, right? We're used to working with the materials that these factions have on hand. We're used to working with Godstone and gold and silk, and we're used to working with root and bone and amber. But now with the Jorah, we get to experience something that we haven't touched at all in our designs before, which is pure industrial, right? We get to work with squares, we get to work with catwalks.
Wow.
And I'm excited to work with squares. I don't know about you.
Dude, cylinders.
Oh,
the
man.
squares.
Oh man, you guys have no idea how excited I am for squares.
Sorry,
That's
I
just
just
the
got
hardest thing to say. It's like squares are cool, but hear me out. Cylinders. That's where it's
Cylinder.
Well, and I think that there's kind of an appeal to like that really messy industrial stuff, like oil rigs or drilling stations, right? Where like everything clearly serves a function, but if you pull out and just look at everything from above, it's just kind of like a mess of steel. I think it's really expressive. It's fascinating to look at. I love it.
Absolutely. And so I think we're rolling up into the end here, but just before, Javi, did you have actually an element that you, because we just went on this
Yeah.
huge time on the Jorah, but you didn't say anything about the Jorah before we
Well,
close
just-
out.
I got excited about squares.
Something art-wise in the future that I'm excited about. This might not be exciting for other people, but polish. Just adding polish to what we currently have. Like polishing the heck out of everything. I'm super excited about that. Because we always try to hit MVP, right? Something that's good enough. and then we can build more and more content.
Okay,
But
God, that makes sense.
I want to polish the hell out of everything so hard. I'm really excited about that. Then Jorah is. I'm super excited about Jorah as well. Working on a new faction. Getting your hands on a brand new flavor is always super exciting. And then there's a couple of other factions that still aren't in the immediate horizon, but
Can we name
Iratech,
them?
which is I think we can. Stop me, someone stop me if I can't. But Iratech,
Hurry up,
which
just
is
go so we can. We'll end off of your note where you tell us the secret reveal right now, quickly.
Iratech, which is a sister faction to Aru. They are more beautiful, more virtuous, more based on like some Japanese ideas of finding beauty in everything. But they're also like insanely badass. And then Herlesh, which is like a more cosmic horror kind of very, very disturbing, very eerie, very cool and creepy faction. And yeah, that's all I'll say.
And so that's it. And so those are a lot of cool stuff for everybody. I love when you said Japanese, my ears like perked up. I was like, yes, please, Japanese. Absolutely. You got the weeb host here. So absolutely. So I want to say, I think that we started this talk with the idea of understanding where great RTS art comes from. And I really feel that we covered so many great elements that reveal, especially for me, someone who I definitely consider myself an end user. You guys pulled back the curtain to allow me to see this process. And I wanted to thank you, especially on behalf of the audience here, for sharing your experiences and your stories with us. And very much thank you very much for being here, all of you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely. And to you guys and gals in the audience, I hope that you got from this a deeper appreciation for the blood, sweat, and tears, but also the passion and the dedication to put together something that you will find and enjoy and love and build your own memories off of. So I've been your host, Drek, and this has been the panel on, where does great RTS art come from? Until next time, see you later.